Many people will wonder when Jesus was crucified. Most videos on this topic will focus on the weekday of his crucifixion rather than the actual date. But in this video, I will identify the date of his crucifixion. And following the scientific method, evidence will be provided to support this date. This issue is important for Christians because when they cannot identify the date of his crucifixion, it allows mockers to use this lack of information to attack their beliefs. Here is one such example.
Christians say that Jesus was crucified on Good Friday, but the Bible states that Jesus would be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. Friday to Sunday is only 2 days, which means the Bible is wrong. And since the Bible is wrong about something like this, then no one can trust the Bible.
And here is another example.
Christians say that Jesus was crucified in either 30 or 33 AD. But there was a prophecy from God to Pilate's wife saying that Pilate would suffer if he put Jesus to death. However, Pilate remained as governor until 36 AD, which means that Pilate did not suffer any consequences after putting Jesus to death. This is why we cannot trust the Bible.
In this video, I will address these difficulties, giving the viewer a solid foundation to trust the Bible and deepen their faith in Jesus. My research into Jesus' crucifixion yielded only 4 reasonable dates for his crucifixion. There was a Friday in 31 AD, a Wednesday in 32 AD, a Thursday in 35 AD, and a Wednesday in 35 AD. 3 of these dates were eliminated for various reasons, which I will cover in the video. The remaining date will agree with Scripture and all known historical evidence. In the traditions of Moses and Aaron, I'm going to turn the rest of this narration over to Andrew, my AI assistant.
Many people believe that Jesus was crucified in either 30 or 33 AD on a Friday, which is where we get the term Good Friday. However, the evidence will show that Jesus was crucified on April 12, 35 AD. I reached this conclusion by aligning our calendar with the Bible's calendar and matching the criteria given in Scripture, along with the relevant evidence from Roman historical records. This video goes into the detail of how I align these calendars and will allow others to validate my results. Let me begin with today's agenda. There are 4 main points that I will cover in this video. First, I'll cover the facts accepted by Christians concerning his crucifixion. Second, I'll tackle the issue of the weekday when Jesus was likely crucified. Third, I'll synchronize the Bible's calendar with today's Gregorian calendar to arrive at a date for Jesus' crucifixion. Last, I will present the results, reviewing each year individually, and then reviewing only those possible dates for his crucifixion before identifying the date for his crucifixion. In this segment, I will address all known facts about his crucifixion. Scholars are unified that Jesus was crucified between 29 and 36 AD. These boundary years were established for 2 reasons. First, the Bible states that Pontius Pilate was the Judean governor who crucified Jesus. Roman records show that Pilate ruled Israel between 26 and early 36 AD. Second, according to Luke, John the Baptist's ministry began in the 15th year of the Roman Emperor Tiberius, which would have been about 29 AD. Since Jesus and John meet during John's ministry years, this would mean that Jesus could not have been crucified prior to 29 AD. Third, all Christians claim that Jesus was crucified either on a Wednesday, a Thursday, or a Friday. Thus, in my research, I considered all these weekdays. Fourth, from the Gospels, we know that Jesus rose from the grave on a Sunday. These specifics from the Bible help me narrow down to the Jewish date of his crucifixion. So, I next focused on the Jewish month and day of Jesus' crucifixion. The Gospels tell us that Jesus was crucified after eating the Passover meal. Leviticus 23 tells us that Passover was at sundown on Nisan 14, with the meal being eaten on the 15th. But when did the month of Nisan begin? The month of Nisan began with the first new moon after the spring equinox, which is always in March between the 19th and the 21st. But Passover occurred 2 weeks after the spring equinox, so I did not want to confuse the Gregorian date for Nisan 1 with the Passover date on the 15th. There were some nuances about the calendar in use during this period that I had to address as well. The biblical calendar was a lunar-based calendar. Bible scholars know of at least 2 Jewish calendars. The one used in Jesus' time was from the Babylonian captivity. Following the Babylonian calendar, a month began when the new moon was first sighted, which can only be seen in the dark. This means the sighting had to occur between sunset at 6 p.m. and sunrise at 6 a.m. Another issue was that lunar cycles do not align with the solar cycle because solar years have slightly more than 365 days, while lunar years have 354 days. Because of these differences, periodic adjustments were necessary to keep the lunar calendar aligned to the solar cycle. Since the month officially began after the sighting of the new moon, the official start of the month could be delayed because a full cloud cover throughout the night could hinder this sighting. So I needed to allow for this possibility in my research. Therefore, I considered two possible scenarios for each year: a cloud-free sighting and a cloud-delayed sighting. Obviously, one could assume more than a single-day delay for the sighting, but I stuck to a single day's delay for simplicity. So, summarizing the facts, Jesus was crucified between 29 and 36 AD, on either a Wednesday, a Thursday, or a Friday, and he rose from the grave on Sunday. The Jewish month of Nisan began after sighting of the new moon, which was after the equinox in March between the 19th and the 21st. But poor weather could delay the sighting of this new moon, and he was crucified on Nisan the 15th after Passover, or 2 weeks after the month began. In the next segment, I will address the weekday that Jesus was likely crucified. This segment will be used to eliminate weekdays when Jesus could not have been crucified, like a Monday or Tuesday. There are multiple passages in Scripture that state that Jesus was crucified on the day before the Sabbath, on what was known as the Preparation Day. This passage from Mark is one passage that mentions the Preparation Day. Mark wrote when evening had already come, since it was the Preparation Day, that is, the day before the Sabbath. So, I began by defining a Jewish Sabbath. To keep my days clear, I needed to recognize that a Jewish day began at sundown, not at midnight as we do today. This was why Mark wrote, when evening had already come. Mark was clarifying that Jesus was buried before sunset, the beginning of the Sabbath, and not on the Sabbath itself. But what is a Sabbath? The term Sabbath means holy day, or as we say it, holiday. There were two types of Sabbaths: the regular weekly Sabbath, or Sunday for us, and special Sabbaths, like Thanksgiving. Some of the Jewish special Sabbaths were Passover, also known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, the Day of Atonement, and others. Next, it is known that Jesus was crucified on the day before special Sabbath, because John stated, "For that Sabbath was a high day." If the Sabbath occurred on the same day as the weekly Sabbath, John would not need to point out that it was a high day, as the term high implies out of the norm. Next, I included Jesus' prophecy about his time in the grave. Jesus stated, "The Son of Man will be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights, specifically mentioning 6 12-hour periods. Following Jewish customs, the first and last period could be a portion of that 12-hour period, and it would still be counted as the full period. So, at minimum, there was a half-hour day, a 12-hour night, a 12-hour day, a 12-hour night, a 12-hour day, and a half-hour night. This meant that Jesus was in the grave between 49 and 62 hours. Some have argued that this 3 days and 3 nights is a platitude. But what good is a prophecy if it is too generic for someone to be certain of its fulfillment? Second, claiming that this is a platitude exposes a lack of understanding of the Jewish customs. The Jewish day started at sunset. Thus, it would have been 3 nights and 3 days. The key here is, why did Jesus specify these periods in the reverse order? One reason could be that Jesus knew he would be killed and buried before sunset, and that he would rise before sunrise. Next, I turn to the Jewish customs about the dead and body decomposition rates. Even today, people have been declared dead, only to wake up later. After a person dies, their body goes through a series of steps as it decomposes. Immediately after death, the body is in the fresh stage, which usually lasts 1 or 2 days. One of the signs a body is in the fresh stage is rigor mortis. After this, the bloated stage begins and the body begins to smell. Thus, a pungent odor of putrefaction would become noticeable beginning around 48 hours after death. Some things could slow this process, including wrapping the body and being underground where it will be cooler. Both of these occurred with Jesus' burial. From the story of Lazarus rising from the grave, we see that the Jews also knew of these facts. In the book of John, Martha points out to Jesus that Lazarus' body would stink because 4 days had passed. From this, we can see something of the Jewish custom at the time. The Jewish custom was that until a person was dead for at least 48 hours, they had not officially died. Since a Friday crucifixion would mean that Jesus' body was only in the grave between 25 and 38 hours, his body would not smell. This means that when he rose from the grave, the Jews would have declared that he had never died. But this did not happen. However, a Thursday crucifixion would mean that he was in the grave between 49 and 62 hours. Similarly, a Wednesday crucifixion would mean that he was in the grave between 73 and 86 hours. So, for both the Thursday and Wednesday crucifixion scenarios, the Jews would have acknowledged that Jesus had died, even if he subsequently rose from the grave. So again, a Friday crucifixion seemed to be ruled out. Next, I traced Jesus' time in the grave, using passages from Matthew and John to establish 3 parameters for his time in the grave. My first parameter was the 3 days and 3 nights limit given by Jesus. My second parameter was the time of Jesus' passing. Matthew 27 records that Jesus was still alive around the 9th hour, which is our 3 p.m., and that he died shortly thereafter. Since Joseph would need more than 30 minutes to ask for Jesus' body, have Pilate confirm Jesus was dead, and then take him to the grave, I set the earliest burial time of Jesus at 3:30 p.m. And my last parameter was when Jesus' body was discovered as missing. Mary discovered Jesus was missing before sunrise, as it was still dark at that time. To better visualize this information, I created a table to show what must have occurred. Then, I walked the timeline backwards, finding that, for the third and final night, Jesus rose from the grave during the nighttime hours of Saturday night to Sunday morning. We do not know how long he was in the grave on Saturday night, but we know that he was long gone when Mary arrived before sunrise on Sunday morning, yielding between a half hour and as much as 11 hours. For the third day, Jesus was in the grave during the daytime hours of Saturday for 12 hours. For the second night, Jesus was in the grave during the nighttime hours of Friday night to Saturday morning, adding another 12 hours. For the second day, Jesus was in the grave during the daytime hours of Friday, which was another 12 hours. For the first night, Jesus was in the grave during the nighttime hours of Thursday night to Friday morning, for another 12 hours. And for the first day, which was his crucifixion day, Jesus was buried sometime between 3:30 p.m. and 6 p.m., yielding between 2.5 hours and a half hour. This strongly suggested that Jesus could not have been buried on a Friday. Many people have postulated similar ideas, but I wanted to dig even deeper. So, in this next segment, I address the identification of the date of his crucifixion. The calendar we use today is known as the Gregorian calendar, and I wanted to align it to the Bible's calendar to determine the actual date of his crucifixion. Before I begin this segment, let me do a quick review of the important facts. First, the crucifixion was between the years of 29 and 36 AD. I considered it highly unlikely that Jesus could have been crucified in either 29 or 36 AD. But I still wanted to consider these 2 years as a possibility, while favoring 30 to 35 AD, so that I did not miss the correct date. The reason the year 29 is generally excluded is that this year would push things very tight, since both John and Jesus would have been killed in the same year. Likewise, the year 36 would not give Rome sufficient time to react to Pilate's mistake. Last and most importantly, I did not know of any Bible scholar who advocates either of these 2 years for the year of his crucifixion. Second, All Christians agree that Jesus was crucified on either a Wednesday, a Thursday, or a Friday, with most favoring either a Thursday or a Friday. Third, Jesus rose from the grave on a Sunday, sometime between 6 p.m. on Saturday and 6 a.m. on Sunday. And Jesus was crucified on Nisan the 15th, after the Passover meal. This meant that Jesus had to have been crucified somewhere between April 2nd and May 4th. Another critical piece of evidence in my research was Pilate's wife's dream, which is found in Matthew 27. Since this was included in Scripture, it was apparent to me that the disciples considered it a prophecy from God and that it was fulfilled. But let me lay out my thoughts on this prophecy. Most people today do not realize the serious nature of Pilate's mistake in losing control of Jesus' body. Pilate made an error because he allowed the body of an alleged king of kings to escape Rome's control. While part of a governor's duties was the collection of taxes, the primary responsibility for any Roman governor was the protection of the Roman Empire, namely the suppression of any rebellions before they could begin. They must permanently eliminate all threats. So, any person allegedly superior to the emperor would be seen as a threat. Thus, Pilate's primary responsibility was to ensure that this alleged Lord of Lords was eliminated, and most importantly, that he stayed dead. Failure to do otherwise would encourage rebellion across the entire empire. Because of the magnitude of his mistake, Pilate would necessarily delay reporting this failure until he had exhausted every avenue to recover Jesus' body. Then, there would be more delays before Pilate received Rome's response. First, there would be some travel delays. In biblical times, travel from Judea to Rome would take about 2 months. Then, Rome would need to decide on a course of action and their subsequent response. Last, this response would have to travel back to Pilate, taking about 10 days, as the prevailing wind conditions would allow faster travel back to Judea. It is known from Roman records that Pilate was removed from office in the spring of 36 AD. Given this limitation, it is highly unlikely that Jesus could have been crucified in 36 AD because it would not give Rome sufficient time to hear about it and then to react to his failure. But given the magnitude of this issue, Rome would likely respond quickly. Let me draw a parallel here. Pilate's mistake is similar to the recent Bud Light controversy. Here's some background on this. This incident began on April 1st, 2023. Budweiser's initial response was to place the person who came up with the advertisement on a leave of absence. But in November, Budweiser concluded that they had to fire the marketing vice president. Why? It is every executive's responsibility to protect the reputation of the company. Since she failed this primary duty, she was deemed unfit for her role within the company. This timeline gave me some idea of the response time that Rome would have taken before responding to Pilate's mistake. Thus, I considered it reasonable for Rome to respond between 8 to 12 months, although it could have taken as long as 3 years. These conclusions indicated that Jesus was crucified between 33 and 35 AD. With these facts gathered, my next step was the actual alignment process. The alignment of these two calendars can be accomplished based upon the cyclic nature of the Gregorian calendar and the similar, but different, cyclic nature of the lunar calendar. Since the Jewish calendar was anchored on the new moon's appearance, and there are websites that link the Gregorian dates to the new moons for the years in question, the common ground was this appearance. In my efforts to align the two calendars, I needed to consider that there are 7 days in a week, and that I would need to adjust for our leap years. Then, I looked up the new moon dates from multiple new moon websites, confirming that they gave a similar date and time for the new moon over Jerusalem for the years in question. While I found that the actual occurrence of a new moon varied by as much as 5 minutes due to gravitational impacts, the date was not in question. These facts allowed me to synchronize the Gregorian calendar with the calendar in the Bible. So, my parameters were all years between 29 and 36 AD, a 1-day cloud delay, which gave 16 possible dates for his crucifixion, 2 for each of the 8 years. The new moon must occur between May 19th and April 20th. And, last, Passover occurred between April 2nd and May 4th. As I mentioned earlier, the dates of new moons can be found on many websites. One such website is stellafane.org. There is a link below for this website. This table is from this website, and it is one example of the new moons occurring between March 21st and April 20th for the years of 29 through 36. There are two callouts that I need to mention about this website. First, to properly obtain the date and time of the new moon, one must set the computer time zone to Jerusalem time. If you use your own time zone, your results will be based upon your own location. Second, this website displays the wrong day of the week for the new moon. I'll address how I discovered this when I cover the alignment methods, which is up next. I found that there were 3 methods to align our calendar to the proper day of the week. First, there is the doomsday calculation, which was discovered by John Conway in 1973. Another method was to count the number of days between today and the dates within the possible years. And the last method was using brute force, which was creating a list of all the days between today and the possible years. I'll next review the pros and cons of each method. The first method is known as the doomsday calculation. This website, timeanddate.com, uses the doomsday calculation to provide a weekday for a given date. I provided a link below for this website. This website does a pretty good job at identifying the weekday for the years in question, but it is not perfect. Here is an example. I will start with the factual statement that April 12th of year 35 in the 1st century was a Thursday. When calculating this date, the website properly calculated the 35th year as occurring in the 1st century, as seen in step number 4 having a 00 century, so this step was done right. But it displayed the results as April 12th, 1935 Thursday, or the 20th century. Something was wrong here. However, when calculating April 12th, 1935, the website properly calculated the 35th year in the 20th century and displayed the results as April 12th, 1935, a Friday. So, obviously, April 12th, 1935 could not be both a Thursday and a Friday. Therefore, one of these had to be wrong, and that created some uncertainty. Thus, a flaw to this method was that it is easy to make a mistake. Second, and more importantly, how would a person reviewing this date know if there was a problem without seeing this sort of error? Please note that this does not mean that the doomsday calculation process is incorrect. Rather, it means that one cannot trust people to properly use the doomsday process. But how could I determine this weekday with absolute certainty? My second method was to count the number of days in each year between now and the years in question. I have previously used Excel to accomplish this process, and I came to the same conclusion that is reached in this video. I demonstrated this in another video with a similar title, so I'm not going into any more details about this option. However, this process was complicated, and it is prone to errors. And thus, like the doomsday method, how could an independent person trust it? The third method was to create a detailed list for all dates from today to 29 AD. This option was not available until recently because personal computers could not handle the necessary calculations. Even today, this list is difficult to create. However, once this list is created, it is easily verified by almost anybody. One may ask, why is it difficult to create such a list? There were a few challenges in this effort. The first challenge was that Excel cannot perform any date calculation prior to January 1st, 1900. This includes both the date and the weekday calculations. Second, Excel tends to max out when more than 750,000 calculations are performed. In retrospect, there were more than 750,000 days on this list. Because Excel could not calculate any date prior to January 1900, I separated the date into different columns. Next, I added calculations to adjust the date from the previous date, adjusting for the leap years as needed. I also wanted to include the weekday, so I added another calculated column. In total, there were 4 columns of calculations. This meant that there were more than 3 million calculations in the intended spreadsheet. I have a decent PC, but it was not able to handle this task. It kept maxing out at 100% of utilization whenever I tried to calculate more than 3 centuries in the spreadsheet. And even when it calculated a single century, it ran slowly. So, I had a quandary here. My solution was to calculate 1 century at a time. Then, I saved these results into a separate file, converting all the formulas into values to eliminate any calculations in a new spreadsheet. After I finished calculating all the centuries, from 2099 to 1 AD, I added yet another calculated column to count the number of days within that year. This allowed me to verify that my leap year calculations were done correctly, ensuring that every leap year had 366 days, and all the other years only had 365 days. During the process, I also noticed that I was prone to forget to adjust the starting weekday for each century, which caused my weekday column to be questionable. So, I also overwrote the day of week column to ensure its accuracy. It took me over a week to find a solution and complete it, which is why I provided a copy of my list for your review. This list is available for downloading in 3 variants. The first version is a values-only spreadsheet. I recommend that most people use this version for their validation efforts because of the intense resources needed for any Excel-based calculations. The drawback of this version is that the reviewer will need to take some time to verify the results. Here are some checks that one may want to do using the drop-down filters. Does each year have the right number of days in the year? Does every leap year have a February 29th date? Do any non-leap years have a February 29th date? Is the weekday column properly populated? However, once this version is validated, it is easy to use. For the more adventurous, I provided 2 additional versions for review. They are subsets of the list above, but they can be used to programmatically verify the results. The next version is one of limited formulas, but with all the dates as values. Only the days in year column is calculated. This column counts the number of days in the year, so that one can verify that leap years have 366 days, rather than 365 days. To be fair, I need to warn you, modifying this spreadsheet, including just using the drop-down options, may take an excessive amount of time or overload your computer. You should expect any adjustment to take 20 minutes or longer. The last version contains a single century only, with all fields as calculations. While it contains the 20th century, it will work for any century since the 1st century. You can follow the steps in the spreadsheet, but be prepared to spend a few days doing this work, even with the steps that I provided. These latter versions were from my efforts to create the values-only spreadsheet. All these spreadsheets have a link below. My subsequent task was to present the results in a coherent manner, enabling an informed interpretation of the findings. I decided to create a modern-day calendar, aligning the Gregorian date with the Jewish date in the month of Nisan. Both weather conditions, clear and cloudy, were addressed. Each year was reviewed to ensure nothing was overlooked. Therefore, both solutions for each year were placed on the same page. These 2 solutions were named synced and sync delayed. Synced indicated that the month of Nisan commenced as scheduled without any delays due to weather conditions. Synced delayed signified a 1-day delay because cloud cover obscured the new moon on the first day. To aid in synchronization, I decided to have 3 visuals within each calendar date box. I placed the Nisan date in the upper left-hand corner, much like our calendars today. Where appropriate, I added a black circle in the upper right-hand corner to denote a new moon occurrence. Since the start of Nisan was relative to the new moon's appearance, Nisan 1 would always be between the same day and 2 days later than this icon. Thus, some adjustments were necessary. For example, the new moon could not be seen during daylight hours. As such, it would be seen after sundown, which would be the next Jewish day, causing the month of Nisan to begin 1 day after the new moon's icon. Likewise, a cloudy day would hinder the observation of the new moon. This would cause the month of Nisan to begin 1 to 2 days after the new moon date. It would be a single day if the new moon occurred during the nighttime hours, but 2 days if it occurred during daylight hours. And, of course, no adjustment would be necessary if the new moon occurred during the nighttime hours. Last, in the lower right-hand corner, I added the matching Gregorian date. This was determined from the new moon website, matching the date of the new moon with its Gregorian date, regardless of what time that new moon occurred. I also aligned each day with its respective day of the week, much like the calendars that we are all familiar with today. This is an example of the resulting calendar month. Here, you can see the new moon indicator on Nisan 1. It demonstrates a scenario where the new moon occurred during the nighttime hours. I also wanted to highlight the date of Jesus' crucifixion, which was Nisan 15. And I wanted to highlight the following Sunday, which was when Jesus rose from the grave. This allowed me to quickly categorize the scenarios and then flag them. I flagged each scenario with an icon to represent its status. This example implied that Jesus was crucified on Tuesday, which did not happen. So, I flagged it with a red X. And I flagged Wednesday crucifixions with a purple star. The color and icon were not meant to lessen a Wednesday crucifixion as a possibility. Rather, I wanted to provide an easy-to-see, color-coded reference for later. And I randomly picked out an icon and color to differentiate it visually from the other possible solutions. My weekday research indicated that Christ was crucified on a Thursday, so I favored Thursdays. Thus, I assigned Thursdays with a green check mark. Last, I flagged Friday crucifixions with a blue question mark. Again, this was not to lessen a Friday crucifixion as a possibility, but to provide an easy-to-see reference. In subsequent steps, these calendar scenarios were shrunk down to the point that they were impossible to read. So color-coding the symbols became very important for me. Finally, I positioned each scenario in its appropriate location on the table for that year. With this as a foundation, let us review each year. While most, if not all, Bible scholars would rule out 29 AD for Jesus' crucifixion, I included it. For this year, there was a Wednesday solution. Here is another call-out. There is no need to try to memorize all these scenarios, as I'll be reviewing these later. After the review process of each year, I placed all the viable solutions on a subsequent target table to create a high-level overview of the results. I'm going to go through each year quickly, but the calendar spreadsheet, available in the link below, has all these details. For 30 AD, there was no solution for Jesus' crucifixion. For 31 AD, there was a Friday solution. For 32 AD, there was a Wednesday solution that had a weather delay. For 33 AD, there was no solution for Jesus' crucifixion. For 34 AD, there was no solution for Jesus' crucifixion. For 35 AD, there was a Wednesday and a Thursday solution, with the Thursday being a weather-delayed solution. I also included 36 AD in my research, even though scholars reject it as possible. For 36 AD, there was a Wednesday solution with a weather delay. Next, I designed a table for the possible results to summarize the solutions into a single overview table. First, I created a table with a column for each year. The higher the scenario was within the table, the more likely that it occurred. I also wanted to evaluate the year, comparing it to the year when Pilate received the consequences of Jesus' body disappearing. So, those to the right and closest to Pilate's removal were considered as more probable. Thus, the best scenario would be in 35 AD with clear weather. One step down was either a cloud delay in 35 AD or clear weather in 33 or 34 AD. Both were considered equal, meaning a very good possibility, as the time delay before Pilate was removed was reasonable. Then came the less desirable scenarios. These would be a cloud delay in either 33 or 34 AD. Worse, but still acceptable, were the years 31 and 32 AD. I did not feel like these years were likely, as it may have implied that God does not know the future and that Pilate was removed for reasons other than Jesus' crucifixion. Next were the unlikely scenarios, which was any scenario in 30 AD. In my view, this was much worse, since it would imply that God does not know the future and that Pilate was removed for reasons that were totally unrelated to Jesus' crucifixion. This is why many scholars today reject the 30 AD year as the year of his crucifixion. As a side note, the 30 AD year became favored when scholars believed that Jesus lived for 30 years and was born in 1 AD. But when scholars realized that a 30 AD crucifixion implied that Pilate avoided the consequences from his wife's dream, they gravitated to favor the 33 AD year. Last were those scenarios deemed impossible by Bible scholars, the years of 29 and 36. Next, I placed the results on the table. There was a Wednesday solution in 29 AD with a weather delay. Did you notice how small the calendars appear on the table? This is why I had to use color-coded icons. I had to allow for easy visualization of the crucifixion weekday for that scenario. There was also a Wednesday solution in 36 AD with a weather delay. Since both of these were in the years deemed impossible by scholars, and they required a Wednesday crucifixion, I ruled them out. Next, there was a Friday solution in 31 AD with clear weather. And there was a Wednesday solution in 32 AD that was weather delayed. There were two solutions in 35 AD, a Thursday cloud-delayed solution and a Wednesday clear weather solution. Overall, there were 6 possible solutions, but only 4 reasonable solutions. Thus, my focus turned to these 4. Using my earlier exercise of the weekday for Jesus' crucifixion, I narrowed it down further. A clear weather Friday crucifixion in 31 AD implied that God did not know the future, since Pilate avoided any consequences for 5 years, even with such a major mistake. Likewise, a cloud-delayed Wednesday crucifixion in 32 AD also implies that God did not know the future, but the delay is only for 4 years, which is a little more palatable. It also implied that Jesus lied when he stated that he would be in the grave for 3 days, as a Wednesday crucifixion would result in him being in the grave for 4 days. Next was a cloud-delayed Thursday crucifixion in 35 AD. Last was a clear weather Wednesday crucifixion in 35 AD. In my mind, this solidified the probability that the year 35 was the year of Jesus' crucifixion. Based upon my earlier research, the Thursday crucifixion was the most likely date for Jesus' crucifixion, which ruled out the Wednesday crucifixion. I'd like to point out here that the traditional years for his crucifixion, both 30 and 33 AD, have been ruled out as possibilities for his crucifixion as there were no possible solutions based upon the criteria given in Scripture. Next, let's look closer at this Thursday solution in 35 AD. I'm sure you don't like looking at these tiny calendars. I sure didn't. As seen here, it validated my earlier exercise in determining the likely weekday of Jesus' crucifixion as a Thursday. And the date was April 12th, 35 AD. This scenario also refutes mockers' attempts to proclaim a failed prophecy from God. Pilate did receive timely consequences for crucifying Jesus the Christ, approximately a year later. In addition, Jesus was in the ground for 3 days and 3 nights, just as he foretold. We've all heard the commercials that say, "But wait, there's more." This is like one of these commercials. Looking at this calendar closely, I noticed that Jesus rose from the grave on April 15th. This means that April 15th is the day that Americans must pay their debt to our government. But it is also when Jesus broke death's hold over us 2,000 years ago. So, our greatest debt was paid 2,000 years ago on our tax day. Personally, I find that coincidence to be amazing. To summarize my research, Christians believe that Jesus was crucified in 30 or 33 AD on either a Wednesday, a Thursday, or a Friday. But it was impossible for Jesus to have been crucified in 30 or 33 AD, as Passover did not fall on any of these 3 weekdays. Jesus' prophecy of 3 days and 3 nights indicates a Thursday burial. There are 3 approaches to synchronize today's Gregorian calendar with the biblical calendar. First, the doomsday calculation, which is susceptible to mistakes in application. Second, counting days, which is also prone to error. And third, creating a detailed list, which was challenging to compile but user-friendly. There were 4 potential dates for his crucifixion. First, there was a Friday in 31 AD, but that implied that God does not know the future since Pilate suffered no consequences for crucifying Jesus. Second, a Wednesday that was late due to a cloud delay that started the month of Nisan in 32 AD. But this one implied that God does not know the future since Pilate suffered no consequences for crucifying Jesus, and that Jesus lied when he foretold that he would be in the grave for 3 days. Third, a Thursday that was late due to a cloud delay that started the month of Nisan in 35 AD. And fourth, a Wednesday in 35 AD. Therefore, Jesus was crucified on Thursday, April 12, 35 AD. Additionally, this would have meant that he rose from the grave on April 15th, our American tax day. And that wraps up today's topic.